Okay, so next we're going to look at task 1 writing. So here we've got 4 pie charts, 2 of them about Australia, 2 of them about France. So the pie charts below show units of electricity production by fuel source in Australia and France in 1980 and 2000. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So the first thing I always tell my students to look at when they look at the task 1 question is the first thing you want to do is you want to check the dates, okay? So the most common mistake people make is they're writing in the wrong tense. So we can see here it's 1980 and 2000, which tells me all the answers should be talking about the past tense, okay? So that's the first thing I want to check, okay? So everything that's written in the answer should come out in the past tense. Okay, and then when we look at the chart that's being provided, we can see it's a pie chart and that we should be making comparisons, okay? So we've got, you can either make a comparison between the countries, you can compare France to Australia, or you could do a paragraph where you compare Australia in 1980 to Australia in 2000, and then compare France in 1980 to 2000. So you can compare that way, or you can compare down, okay? You can compare Australia to France in 2000, and you can compare Australia to France in 1980, okay? So from looking at that, I can see that we've got a couple of different ways you could compare this information, and I think that would be a really important thing to focus on in the answer, is making comparisons. If you can make lots of good comparisons, that's going to boost your coherence score. Okay, so if we look at this answer starts with the pie charts above illustrate, singular, units of electricity by fuel source in Australia and France in 1980 and 2000. Okay, so the first thing I notice here is they've not really paraphrased the opening sentence at all. Okay, so if we look, they've just basically switched above for below, shows units of electricity by fuel source. So there's been a little bit of paraphrasing, but not really for me enough. So one thing that you could easily do that would switch it up, you could sort of between might be a good paraphrase to do. Or you could say over, 40 years or something. You can mention it's been a 40-year period, or 20 years rather, 20 years. So as it is observed, pie charts give information about units of electricity by fuel. So we need to say these pie charts give information about units of electricity by fuel, coal, oil, natural gas, hydropower, and nuclear power. So in this sentence, we can say as it is observed. So that's not really the right phrase for this, because when you're observing something, maybe something is happening which is distant from you that you're not involved in, and you're watching from further away. Okay, so that's not really what we mean here. You can observe, for example, you can observe pandas, you can observe behavior, you can observe children, but here the pie charts, we're just looking at the pie charts and understanding the information. So you want to instead put something like it is clear to see, or the pie charts show, or something like that. Observed here is not really the right phrase to use, because we're just looking at the information and understanding the information. So it's clear to see these pie charts give information about units of electricity by fuel, and then this person's listed off all the types of power, okay? So this is not a good thing to do, okay? Why? Because the information has already been listed to me in the graph. So you're not showing me any of the skills. You're not showing me, vocabulary. You're not sort of showing me task achievement. You're just listing some of the words that have been given to you in the pie chart, okay? So if you look at the pie chart, we can see they've just copied these words and put them in a list, okay? So where this might help you is you could be trying to go for grammar by showing that you can list stuff, but here we've got a semicolon instead of a colon. So you're not even really showing a grammar score here, because that should be a semicolon. Okay, so I can't give you more points for vocabulary because you're not paraphrasing. I can't give you more points for grammar because the grammar is incorrect. So I'm not a fan of listing things. So I would change this to these pie charts give information about the units of electricity produced by, and then you can summarize it. You can paraphrase this. You can say 5 types of resources, 5 types of resources, or something like that, okay? So instead of listing out all the types, you can say 5 types of power, 5 types of resources, 5 types of energy production materials, however you want to paraphrase that, would be better than just listing out the information that's been given in the graph. So we go, in general, it is clear that the amount of units of electricity by fuel source in 2000 almost doubled so instead of R, almost doubled compared with so here we've got within 1980, that's not right, compared to, you're comparing to something, almost doubled compared to 1980. Okay, so this is so my issue with this is that there's not really a strong paraphrase in the opening sentence. And then they've just given me some more description here. So this is all just describing the information. And then they've picked out one trend here. So they picked out one trend, which is that the amount of electricity has doubled between 1980 and 2000, okay? So they've only given me one trend overall. So I always say the rule with an introduction for task 1 is that you want to start your first sentence, you want to have a strong paraphrase, and you want to have an overview, okay? So your overview should contain 3 trends, or the 3 most important trends, okay, that you can see in the chart. So this person's only identified 1, they've described me some detail, and they've not given me a very strong paraphrase, okay? So the first part of this answer is not looking very strong. So when we look at the second part, so you go on to, this is where you're supposed to give me more of the detail and sort of explain a little bit more. So in Australia, coal took the most part of units of electricity by fuel source in 1980 and 2000, at 50 and 130. On the other hand, in France, coal, oil, and natural gas took part more or less of the same units of electricity. Okay, so the thing that's jumping out of me, and it was the same thing part 1, is that we've got the same words coming up over again. Okay, units of electricity, units of electricity. You've got it again down here, units of electricity. So 3 times in the same paragraph, they've used the same phrase, okay? So to be honest, it's very difficult to paraphrase units of electricity. It's not an easy thing to paraphrase. But one thing you can do is you can just change the word order. So he could say more or less the same electric units would be a way to paraphrase, because you just change the word order. So that would be a slightly different way to say it. But to be honest, if you find yourself saying the exact same phrase over and over, you might want to try and restructure your sentence so you don't have to say it. Okay, that's when you can use referencing, you know, that, this, or something like that, so you don't have to keep repeating the same words. So we've got here, so from the graph, not a graph, from the chart, okay, we all know the difference between a chart and a graph. So a graph goes like that, and then a chart is like a pie chart, okay? So it's not a graph, it's a chart. From the chart, there are significant changes in the amounts of units of electricity by natural gas both in Australia and France in 1980, okay? And then they've given us some detail here, okay? So I think what they're trying to do here is they're trying to show a slightly more sophisticated sentence structure, because we've sort of got a clause here and we've put our detail in brackets. So I mean, that's okay, but it's all just listed exactly the same. 20 in 1980, and 2 in 2000 in Australia, and 25 in 1980, and 2 in 2000 in France, okay? So again, we've got this list where you've just done 4 things exactly the same, okay? The information is correct, you've copied it from the graph, but all you're showing me in this sentence is that you can look at the information and you can repeat it in a sentence, okay? You're not paraphrasing, you're not showing me creative grammar, you're not showing me creative sentence structure, you're just repeating the same thing over and over, okay? So I'm not quite sure why this kind of decided to do that, but it's very difficult for me to give points to that because it's just repeating information. So my main issue with this sentence is this sentence here. So we start with, on the other hand, in France, coal, oil, and natural gas took part more or less the same of units of electricity by fuel source in 1980 at 25, 20, and 25, okay? So we've got our first idea in the sentence here. Okay, so we're making a comparison, and we're talking about coal, oil, and natural gas, and how coal, oil, natural gas, more or less the same, okay, stayed the same over the whole period. And then we get into our second idea, and nuclear power made, so this should be past tense, remember it's talking about the past, made up the largest amounts of it in 2000 at 126, okay? So what's confusing here for me as a reader is that we've got two distinct complete sentences that have been pushed together in one sentence. So I've got two competing ideas. On the one hand, he's talking about coal, oil, and natural gas. And then he's also giving me information about nuclear power. Okay, he's not comparing in the sentence. He's not changing anything. He's just giving me two different parts of information crammed together in one sentence. So it's confusing to read, especially because he's comparing to Australia. He's comparing to the previous sentence. And in the previous sentence, he's only talking about coal. So here he's comparing coal in France and Australia. And then as part of the sentence, he moves on to talking about nuclear power. Okay, so that's confusing to me as a reader. And when I was marking this, I had to go back and double check what exactly the sentence said at the start. Because by the time I got to the end here, I'd forgotten what the start of the sentence was about. Okay, and that's never a good idea. So what this really needs to be is two separate ideas. Okay, and so he should have another connective here, something to connect it. So on the other hand, in France, coal, oil, and natural gas took part more or less the same electric units by fuel source in 1980 at 25, 20, and 20, 25, 20, and 25. Oh, 25, 20, and 25. And then you can add an addition. You can say additionally, in France, nuclear power made up the largest amounts of it in 2000 at 126. Okay. So my main issue with this paragraph is it's not clear, and it doesn't feel like the candidate is writing in an organized way. I feel like when I read this that they're just writing down the ideas as they see them in the chart. Okay. The second thing I'm thinking when I'm looking at this is it looks very short. Okay, it's supposed to be 150 words. I look at this, I think it looks very short, and that doesn't look good about your candidacy. Okay, if I'm thinking you didn't write enough for it. So I feel like they missed a good chance here, is because the point of it is that you're supposed to be comparing, okay? And there weren't, for me, enough comparison words. So how are you going to boost your vocabulary and your coherence score? You need to be using more comparison, okay? So literally, in comparison to, compared to, while, A did B, however, conversely, okay? All these words would have really helped. Conversely, all these words would have helped boost not only their vocabulary score, but also their coherence score. But I feel like this candidate really missed an opportunity to do that because there aren't really many comparison words. As on the other hand, here, so that's one time where they're comparing France and Australia, but that's it really. So I feel they missed a chance to do that. So I don't really have a lot to give them points for here, because most of what they've done is that they've repeated the information that was in the graphs, okay? So if I was going to talk about this in my overview, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what are the three biggest points? Is I want to talk about the fact that coal increased. So the first thing I see is, okay, coal really increased in Australia during this period, but it decreased in France. Okay, so it's comparison one. Coal increased in Australia in this period. However, conversely, on the other hand, it decreased in France. Okay, that's your trend number one. That should be mentioned in your overview, and then you should expand that in detail later on in your answer. Okay, the second thing I can see is that both countries increased their overall production. Okay, this went from 90 to 100, and here we said it went from 100 to 170. Okay, so we've got a difference about the coal, and then we've got a similarity. Okay, both countries' overall production of electricity increased during the period. And then the third thing I would probably talk about would be nuclear power. Okay, so while nuclear power in France really increased during this period, Australia doesn't use nuclear power. Okay, so from this I can see I've got one similarity and I've got two differences, okay, to talk about. So that's going to be your structure of your essay. Okay, so this task really should have started with the paraphrase plus one sentence to talk about each of these. Okay, so one sentence to summarize your similarity, one sentence for each of the differences, and then you should have body one, probably where I would have talked about the one similarity with detail, and then body two, where I'd have talked about the two differences. Okay, and that's where you get your comparisons in. Okay, while on the one hand, the use of coal as a resource increased in the similarity. So while both countries produce the overall production of units of electricity, okay, so that would be your similarity. And then you go on the other hand, conversely, and then you talk about your two differences. Okay, so that's how I would advise to structure this as a better answer. But what I've got here is I've got a sort of paraphrase and one trend, and then this candidate has tried to cram all of the detail into one paragraph, but really it should be separated out. So that was my main issue with this answer. So when I was marking it, I was thinking task achievement, I would sort of give a 4 because there wasn't enough detail, didn't feel long enough. They weren't doing any comparing, they were just sort of repeating information back at me from the chart. Coherence was also a 4 because I felt they could have used many more comparison words linking between sentences, but this candidate really didn't do that. I already given a 4.5 for vocabulary, probably a 4.5 for grammar, because I didn't feel like either of the vocabulary or grammar was particularly impressive, and there were quite a few mistakes. I felt they didn't make enough of their paraphrasing for vocabulary. So overall, I probably would have tipped this into maybe like a 4, I think, overall, because I think there's a lot of room to improve. The first thing I would tell this candidate to do is improve their structure. Go back and look more about task 1 and how you should set it out, okay? You should have at least 3 distinct paragraphs in a task 1 answer, and they only have 2 here. And also I would encourage them to write more, to write to the word limit, because that's really going to help them, and then just be more organized in their structure. So I think that's would be my main feedback to this candidate.